So you see the title of my presentation. I think I'm the only one who is giving a PowerPoint presentation, which it seemingly has become a little bit unfashioned or out-of-fashion. But let me start. I don't think I will take one full hour for what I'm going to say. So let me start when we talk about Europe, and you will see that what I'm going to say, much of it is actually the meat for the skeleton of the theme of the conference, trust and transparency in Europe. So I tried to sum up some of the so-called essentials of Europe, what I call the essentials of Europe. And then I will try to make the claim that in order to preserve the moral foundations of Europe, Europe will have to give up on some of its cultural foundations. So, as I wrote in an article about this some time ago, the conclusion of the article will be that the precondition for the preservation of these foundations, the moral foundations for Europe, is a redefinition of the concept of being European in the direction of an increasingly inclusive identity. So Europe is a relatively small continent, as Americans like to say, a small peninsula on the western border of Asia. A relatively small continent inhabited by a range of different ethnic groups and cultures, originating in the continent's dense separation by rivers, mountains, lakes, valleys, seas, as well as the migration of populations. So that is one element concerning the geography of Europe. Culturally, Europe has a Judeo-Christian religious tradition and an ancient Greek and Roman cultural tradition. Europe has a strong relevance for world history, both in terms of power, conquest. Much of the world has been from time to time conquered by European powers, as you know, but also in terms of culture and science. And then, in theory, I'm reading something that I wrote on my mobile phone, not checking SMS, Twitter, and they're not SMS. So, in theory, we have the values of peace, egalitarianism, liberalism, and democracy that figure prominently in Europe. But on the other hand, also in practice, we see the recurrence of wars among states, conflicts between ethnic groups, religious groups, and even genocides. So when we compare what the European values have been through the centuries in European culture as that for what Europe has strived for, and what has been have been the moral foundations of Europe, and when we see then the European political practice, then we see the last element, so wars, conflicts, ethnic and religious strikes, genocides. So that might be even called the predicament of Europe, which is at the same time the predicament of the human, the quandary of the human, the gap between what we believe is right to do and what we actually do. That is the big moral predicament of human existence, that we do not act as we believe we ought to act in a moral way. If we are minimally critical towards ourselves, we see that we do that on a daily basis, that we could have been better, not only because we did something wrong, but because we failed to do something good and so on. So minimum of self-criticism leads us to conclude that. So there is a gap in our everyday life between what we do and what we believe is right to do. And this predicament of the human in its moral existence is at the same time a predicament of Europe, I would say. There's a huge gap between what the values of Europe are, the moral values of Europe, and what has shown to be the European political practice. So a huge cleavage between the two. Now, let me go back. So at one point in time, this gap has been made smaller by the creation of the European Union as a peace project. So that is also what I see as the main achievement of Europe, that the value of the European Union, that the value of peace has been preserved for some decades already, apart from this region, which was not part of the European Union. But in the European Union, peace has been preserved, and it is, of course, no wonder that the prelude to the European Union was the European Steel and Coal Community. As you know, of course, that time steel and coal were essential for waging wars. So if you have control over these resources at that time, it was much more difficult to wage war. And it is also no wonder that the European Union initially has emerged as a project of France and Germany, the two big powers in Europe that used to wage wars between each other. So the European Union, this intention of its establishment is something that directs us towards the goal of bridging this gap between the moral values of Europe and the political practice of Europe. Now, where do, apart from what I mentioned as the Judeo-Christian, the Greek and Roman tradition, where else do we find something about the values of Europe I'm talking about? Let me turn to Immanuel Kant and towards his work toward perpetual peace. So, what does he say in Perpetual Peace? We know that, that liberal states in a federative union that endorses cosmopolitan law, that is limited to conditions of universal hospitality. The European Union, I would say, is inclined to accept the values of liberalism and a federative union, or a union, the European Union. The endorsement of cosmopolitan law limited to conditions of universal hospitality, well, let us have some reservations concerning that. But, okay, that is something that goes in that direction. But then there is something else that I would like to stress when we talk about Immanuel Kant. So he talks here about the federative union, and not about the world state in towards perpetual peace. But in religion, between the boundaries of mere reason, within the boundaries of mere reason, Kant does talk about the cosmopolitan order, and I'm citing him, a world republic based on the values of virtue, eine universale Republik auf die Werte der Tugend, something like that, right? So he says that in this word religion, within the boundaries of mere reason, he says that explicitly, so world republic, not a federation of states. Now, why is this, why do we see this difference in Kant's position, what seems like a difference in towards perpetual peace and in religion within the boundaries of mere reason? So I'm going to say something about that in an attempted explanation of that. So an explanation might be sought and found in a noteworthy event that occurred in 1794. This is what I'm reading as part of my article. I'm not reading from Wikipedia. So the authorities of the Prussian state decided to undertake repressive actions against Kant because of his writings on religious matters. After having published Religion Within the Boundaries of Mere Reason in 1793 and The End of All Things in 1794, the Prussian king, Friedrich Wilhelm, authorized an official letter to Kant, signed by Friedrich Wilhelm's Minister of Education and Religious Affairs, in which Kant was accused of misusing his philosophy to, I'm citing here, distort and disparage many of the cardinal and basic teachings of the Holy Scriptures and Christianity. The letter also demanded from Kant to, quote, give an account of himself, end quote, and be guilty of no similar faults in the future, lest he be object to unpleasant measures for his continuing obstinacy. The letter was dated October 1st, 1794, and Religion Within the Boundaries of Mere Reason was published a number of months before that. 11 days later, Kant indeed gave what was asked for him, an account of himself, and replied that his writings were purely philosophical and hence were not an attempt to evaluate the Holy Scripture and Christianity. And regarding the second point, however, he pledged, as Your Majesty's most loyal subject, not to discuss publicly any form of religion, whether natural or revealed, either in his lectures or in his writings. And this might explain why Kant did not deal with the concepts that could have any theological bearings in towards perpetual peace. So something that is essential for Kant's philosophy, so the concept of providence, for instance, not even mentioned, I think, in the word perpetual peace. But the religion within the boundaries of mere reason very clearly mentioned, and also very clear, and this is the essential concept of religion without boundaries, within the boundaries of mere reason, the ethical commonwealth, which is something he absolutely does not address in towards perpetual peace, and something that might lead us to the assumption that Kant, not being able in towards perpetual peace to discuss what he wished to discuss openly, because he gave an account of himself and said not discuss anything that even closer resembles religious issues. So, as he discussed in the Religion Within the Boundaries of Mere Reason. So, and where he said that the ethical commonwealth is a world republic based on virtue. So, the ethical commonwealth, not present in towards perpetual peace, present in his systematic Religion Within the Boundaries of Mere Reason, the ethical commonwealth is a community of morally perfected humans. Humans ought to fulfill their moral duties, and providence will then give them a helping hand in achieving the ethical commonwealth. Such a commonwealth transcends all social boundaries and hence extends to the whole of humanity. And in an ethical commonwealth, human moral progress reaches also a political objective, one that is embodied in a cosmopolitan order, a world republic in Kant's words. So this is nothing that is even a slight element of my imagination. I'm saying exactly what Kant is claiming there. So it might then be the case that Kant, not being able to say everything he wished to say in towards perpetual peace about the final goal of history, that he dealt there with an intermediate stage of history, and that is the stage of liberal states in a federative union. Whereas the final purpose of history, Kant says that various places explicitly is a world state based on the laws of virtue. Coming back to the EU, is the EU a prelude to a global federative union that consists of liberal states that aspire at peace in a federative union? So what Kant was claiming towards perpetual peace? Or is the European Union a cosmopolitan order that supersedes the world of nation states with ethnicity as their salient feature? Or This is very unlikely. It is an ethical commonwealth that is being developed. But it might be a small step of humanity towards this. And then we come to the issue of freedom and justice. We'll see how that connects to this. So freedom is a precondition for acting, for us acting intentionally in a just manner. So we can act in a just manner because we're forced to, because we are lucky or not lucky or whatever. But we ought to be free in the first place to be capable of acting intentionally in a just manner. So the issue of freedom is important, and the issue of cosmopolitanism here. So there are moral arguments in favor of cosmopolitanism. I will not go into them. You have one of the interpretations of Kant are concerned, this democratic peace paradigm and this cosmopolitan democracy paradigm. Not going now into that because it would divert us from the theme. But the moral arguments in favor of the cosmopolitan, as we can find in Bayes and Marchetti, and contentions that focus on the likely, in the case of David Held, or necessary, the theological argument of future global developments that purportedly approach a cosmopolitan order. So, freedom and cosmopolitanism, question mark. The normative will, a concept I introduced in some of my articles and in the book. So the general will, in Rousseau's terms, is that what the community wills. But then I said the normative will is what the community believes it ought to will. So we come back to this gap between what we do and we believe is right to do, and the predicament not only of the human but also of Europe in the sense I talked about. So is it the will of the majority, meaning how the majority believes it ought to act? So the normative will is the will of the majority, meaning how the majority believes it ought to act in a moral sense. And this type of belief of the majority can then be defined as justice, which does not have to be the political will of the majority, because the political will of the majority, the general will of Rousseau, is something that people decide to do. They elect or they accept an authoritarian government, they elect a democratic government, but that is what they do in practice. Does not necessarily mean that they believe that that is the morally right thing to do. Hence, justice might be defined as the normative will of humanity. Now, the general will, in Rousseau's sense, the normative will, as I talked about it, and the European Union. Now, globalization is a unique moment in history because never before was the expression of the general will of humanity possible as it is now. That means that there might be room for an institutionalization not only of the general will but also of the normative will, in the sense I talked about. Might the EU be an intermediate stage towards this goal? Like the intermediate stage Kant was addressing towards perpetual peace. If so, then the EU has an immense moral foundation, this idea. If not, the EU is not anything that expresses the normative will, but just the general will, and is merely a political project. Whatever the case, I will say a few words about some challenges that Europe has. Okay, so Europeanism does not necessarily have to result in cosmopolitanism. Eurocentrism might be another type of communitarianism. Regionalism is another type of communitarianism. Both of them possibly substitute for nationalism. So have we made then any progress? Some challenges for Europe too. European Union policies can strengthen nationalism. So we have seen the debates and referendum some time ago surrounding the European Constitution in some countries, how it went wrong. One of the countries being Holland. Also interesting to mention this country because at that time a government was elected in Holland that consisted of an extremist party from the extreme right, unknown until then in Holland. It used to be a party of 0.5%, this kind of parties from the ultra-right, and then at once, seemingly at once, for those who do not know Holland, at once there emerges a very strong ultra-rightist party. On the other hand, a quite leftist, I will not say ultra-leftist, but the Socialist Party, Social Democratic Socialist Party, and the ultra-right making enormous gains in Holland. And what we have in April now in Holland, very interesting, the Dutch government, consisting among other parties also of this ultra-rightist party, says that money ought to be saved, that this 3% threshold of budgetary deficits of the European Union needs to be maintained, and the ultra-rightist party, called the Party of the Freedom Party, Partij van de Vrijheid, says we will not stay in that government, we'll get new elections. And the reaction at that time in April in Holland was, well, this party, already being a strong party and in the government, will make big gains and possibly even take over power, especially because it was supported by the ultra-leftist party, the Socialist Party in Holland. So it looked like a further polarization of Dutch politics is going to take place, so that the moderate parties will further lose ground. But what happened at the elections? The ultra-rightist party lost big time, as did the Socialist Party. So very unexpected for some analysts. It turned then out that the Dutch were smarter than people thought, some analysts thought, and that they elected a government that finally was more in their interest financially than if it went in the other direction. So the conclusion can be that we have the conclusion concerning this issue, that there is a lot of indeterminism. We don't know which way Europe will go. So on the one hand, we see this rise of extremist parties, rise of xenophobia, very present in Holland, but at once the tide seems to turn back to the other side. So I think it is very difficult to make any predictions. And then some further challenges for Europe, that what is frequently talked about, the so-called European Union bureaucracy and politics might overpower Europe's moral foundations. So the EU, as a bureaucratized and politicized entity that does not serve justice in any enhanced manner. Is transparency the solution as the path to trust? Well, that has been addressed already, so I will not say more about that, but I'm asking just a question in this context. Or the economy, or should the European Union be preserved only because it serves peace, or it used to serve peace? Then further challenges, demographic trends that may change the dominant cultural context of Europe. So the influx of immigrants from Islamic countries in combination with the possible admission of Turkey into the EU might impact on the the Christian liberal cosmopolitan value framework that characterizes Europe. So, if Turkey, with its 90 million people, there are no clear censuses at this point there, but it looks like it is already 90 million plus people. It will become the biggest country of the European Union if Turkey gets access to the European Union. Then Russia. Why should Russia be excluded from Europe if it were a democratic country? It is a huge country. It would change the identity of Europe. As the influx of immigrants from Islamic countries also impacts on the cultural identity of Europe. So can the cultural identity of Europe be preserved at all? Let's look at this also. The majority of economic growth is shifting to Eastern Asia. Plus the population of Europe is becoming progressively older, while third world populations are younger, increasingly urbanized, and expanding at a much faster rate. Is there a gradual move of Europe in the direction of the global periphery? And then, of course, we talked 2 days ago about that developments in the field of biotechnology. So genetic engineering and other possibilities of biotechnology might result in the reformulation of a significant number of our moral concepts. For instance, if we are at the stage of development when we can choose what kind of offspring we will have, so embryos have been created with our egg cells and sperm, and we choose among them. Surplus embryos we discard. We decide to have embryos with blue eyes or brown eyes, with a certain degree of IQ, with a certain sexual orientation. We decide about that. Who are those who can decide about it? Who are those who can afford themselves to have children with an IQ that is 150 plus? The wealthier. And that is another challenge for the moral identity of Europe and of humanity in general. Something Fukuyama talked about in his post-human future, where he said that will create even, it has a potential for a world revolution, because it is not only now that the nouveau riche in some countries send their children to study at Harvard and Princeton and Oxford. Well, now they will be even able to have children who are truly more intelligent because they select their offspring. So you will see all kinds of oligarchs, Russian, Serbian, American, German, and so on, who will be the ones who will select the smarter offspring. So it goes further and further. Now, this is what I said already. Coming back to what I started from, the moral foundations of Europe and the moral foundations of the humans, as we saw what the connection is between the two, including the gap between what we do and what we believe we ought to do, and the role of Europe in that regard, the parallel with the predicament of Europe. So, is there a way to save those moral foundations of Europe we talked about? Those foundations that exist in theories of liberalism, cosmopolitanism, peace, and so on. The only way to do that is, and again, that certainly does not guarantee that anything will be saved, nor are we certain, as we talked about during this day of bioethics 2 days ago, we're not even close to being sure that humanity will survive in the next 100 years. So about this we can even be less sure. But one way to save the moral foundations of Europe is to redefine being European, in the sense of broadening the concept of Europe as a means to preserve Europe's moral foundations. So the values of liberalism, cosmopolitanism, and so on cannot be preserved unless the Islamic immigrants are fully, truly integrated into Europe. And if they accept the moral foundations of Europe, the cultural foundations ought to be broadened anyway. But can they accept the moral foundations of Europe? That is the option, the only option I think Europe has to preserve its moral foundations, that is this cultural inclusiveness. Hence, a redefinition of European cultural identity as a precondition for the preservation of the moral foundations of Europe. So, Europe needs to do something about its cultural identity to make it more culturally inclusive in order to preserve its moral foundations. It is the true identity, the most important identity of Europe. And how that connects to economy and to the issue of trust and transparency, I said at the beginning of this lecture, and in the middle somewhere, and I also addressed it in the question I asked, and that is something that has been addressed here by most speakers, but I wanted to present this this background, or as I call it, this meat to the skeleton of the issue, trust and transparency. Thank you.